You're listening to Innovators, the podcast from Harris Search Associates, where we speak with global leaders in education, research, engineering, and the health sciences, and ask them to share lessons learned as they continue to advance the frontiers of innovation and discovery. Today's podcast will be led by Rick Skinner, Senior Consultant.
Someone once suggested you only worry about having a parachute when flight is a practical reality and not something done only by most birds and some insects. And waiting lists for someone to die and give up their heart or their liver are problematic only if transplants really work. Similarly, food safety and food security become conditions to be addressed by research and experimentation when enough of the world's population enjoys safe and accessible food on a consistent basis. To give you some indication of this, consider the following. The Great Famine in China took place during the harvest between 1959 and 1961. And by 1962, tens of millions of people perished from starvation. 44 years later, in 2005, not a very long period of time, historically speaking, the Chinese government reported that 1 in every 5 children in the country was obese. The Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO of the United Nations, estimates that almost 1 in every 11 persons in the world, and that's about 850 million people, suffer chronic undernourishment. And as tragic as those numbers are, consider that just 5 years earlier, 1 in every 8 human beings was malnourished. And this is what the National Science Foundation suggested just this past July. And I quote, "Imagine crops that required less water because a wearable sensor could grow along with a plant and provide more accurate and continuous readings of its hydration. Such a sensor would allow scientists to address fundamental questions about how water is used in a plant and could lead to the development of plants that are more water efficient. Or what about learning what makes some plants grow well even under environmental stress? Understanding how such high priority traits are inherited and genetically modified could lead to corn plants that are more environmentally resilient." These are then big and bold ideas that could be within our grasp, particularly if plant scientists, engineers, and logistics experts work together to do the research that leads to trials that might, just might, take those tragic numbers I cited and make them better. We are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Eleftherios Iakovou from Texas A&M to help us see where research and experimentation as well as large-scale trials are underway in the areas of food safety and security. Fortunate because Dr. Iakovou himself bridges the fields of engineering, logistics, and supply chain management. He holds multiple positions currently at Texas A&M. He is Director of Manufacturing and Logistics Innovation Initiatives at the Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station. He is Associate Director of Supply Chain Management and Applied Operations Research in the Center for Applied Technology. He is Professor and holder of the Research Professorship at the Department of Engineering Technology and Industrial Distribution. And last, but by no means least, he's Director of the Cross-Border Trade and Supply Chain Management, Cross-Border Threat and Supply Chain Defense, the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Center of Excellence based at Texas A&M. After finishing his Ph.D. at Cornell, he worked for 11 years at the University of Miami in Florida and the Department of Industrial Engineering, where he received tenure. He then returned to his native Greece and his alma mater, where he served as Director of the Laboratory of Logistics and Supply Chain Management, Head of the Industrial Management Department, and Chair of the School of Mechanical Engineering. While in Greece, he was awarded the Coordinator of Green Agri-Chains, a leading European-wide consortium, a roughly $2 million center of excellence on the design and management of sustainable supply chains for the agricultural and food sector. And I am told with some assurance that he does a mean Slovakia. Eleftherios, welcome to Innovators.
Rick, Dr. Skinner, pleasure and privilege being with you. Thank you for your kind invitation.
Food and food safety and food security, are they the different words for the same phenomenon? Or how do the terms differ and what does each encompass?
That's a great question that I had to deal with the first time that I had to walk out of my comfort zone and look into agricultural, Rick, when I started creating interdisciplinary grant proposals, bringing together agriculture, logistics, engineering, supply chain management. So apparently United Nations came with food security, dealing with provision of stable and sufficient supply of food that is nutritious and it meets the dietary needs of population. So food security could be a misnomer, but food security entails access to sufficient quantity of food that is safe, nutritious, meeting dietary needs and food preferences. I think of this term as a superset, Rick. When I go down to food safety, this is much more down planet Earth. It's really the clearly interdisciplinary scientific discipline for handling, preparing, storing, and allow me to see here now, logistics, transporting food, right? So across the fork supply chain in ways that prevent foodborne illnesses. And these illnesses are very important today. So clearly, you cannot have the one without the other. So clearly, the food safety is a prerequisite, a necessary condition for food security, but they're distinct with each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps a great deal. But I think in a way you suggested one other thing I'd like to have you at least give us some sense of. Just how large a role do logistics and supply chain management actually play when it comes to addressing food safety and security?
This is a huge question, right? What have we done supply chain management-wise? Why supply chain management has raised to this national landscape? Because of globalization. So let's go to the point. Containerization, NAFTA, when the United States allowed China to enter WTO, we lived all this great era, didn't we? But of course, this era now is gone. We live what the economist now calls in a globalization. Percent of global trade, Rick, in terms of global GDP has shrunk for the first time from 62 to 59%. We live in an era that climate change disruptions, tariff wars, the fact that, I want to say it very plainly, people who are not happy when they see people from across the border doing better, all these things inhibit what we know as the world that has sprung out of the leadership of the United States following 1945, because that's what it entails, right? So world trade rocketed up to 2008. We have an inflection point. Supply chain management has been the critical discipline that brought everything together, from origin to destination, ensuring that products, and in this case, in the agri-food business, are delivered at the right time, at the right quantity, at the right price, at the right quality, ensuring profitability for the owner of the entire supply chain, and at the same time, keeping consumers happy. And at the top of it, we have the Amazonization effect. Allow me the word, the gerund, that pretty much says, I gotta be able not just to be local. I had two former Ernest Young senior gentlemen that mentored me for years. They used to use the term glocalization. Supply chains have to have this glocalized footprint, namely, they have to be global, yet at the same time, they have to have strategically positioned inventories closed to local markets to satisfy local demand funds. And Mr. Bezos' leadership here is changing dramatically e-commerce and with the aggressive prime type strategies that I want to deliver something within a day or two. That has put tremendous pressures on supply chains in general, but furthermore on supply chains of the food. Just to give an idea, every year more than 200 billion metric tons of food are shipped, 35% by land, Rick, 60% by sea, and 5% by air globally. Of course, when I go by air, the environmental footprint deteriorates. It's much more expensive, but perishability and all the great stuff comes into the game, right? So if I have to ship berries, I potentially have to think about air. So 35% by land, 60% by sea, and 5% by air. And there, the modes of transport affect profoundly environmental footprint. So if I want to use heavy-duty trucks as opposed to train is a much more environmental friendly. in the ship business, barges, especially used in Europe. I know you have an affinity of studying what happens on the other side of the pond. Europeans, Port of Amsterdam, really caring about environmental footprint. They use barges. They have the lowest environmental footprint. So supply chains emerged in an environment completely detached from food. Allow me to say that. So the agri people have no clue when we talk about supply chain. And supply chain people, most of the time, don't know anything about agri. And the pressures of the world, the pressures that tell us, look, and you alluded to that much better than me, right? You gave the numbers about global food production, urbanization, the forecasts for increased population. The actual trends dictate that these two worlds come together and work better.
That's a daunting thought, though.
It is.
I must tell you, the point you made about the two worlds not really having much knowledge of each other and yet having to come together. It strikes me that the complexity of resolving that goes beyond simply sitting down at a meeting. We're talking about extraordinarily complicated systems that somehow have to be made to work together. Well, that leads me to ask how much of the research that's associated with food safety and security is carried out by industry, either the supply chain, transport industry, or agriculture, and how much of the research on food safety and security is carried out by universities, and do the two sectors ever collaborate?
First, allow me to go back, if you don't mind. So many constituents, stakeholders transcending government, regulatory agencies, universities, industries, and supply chain stakeholders of the farm to fork that includes producers, retailers, transporters, harvesters, small farm producers. They have to come together. The point is so intense that, I mean, it's at the agenda of the World Economic Forum at the Davos meeting every year. Rick, I have a passion of understanding how the world operates today. And allow me to say that, yes, we know that agriculture is the largest employer in the world, right? It's one of the highest emitters of planet warming greenhouse gases, the GHS emissions. In Europe, it accounts about 15% of its GHS emissions, 15%, right? So that's a huge number. At the same time of creating a huge carbon footprint, it also consumes tons of water. Why am I mentioning water? Water is becoming a destabilization factor in world politics. Just to give you an idea, it takes about 20 gallons of water to make one egg. It takes 150 gallons, just of water, just to make a quarter-pound hamburger. So I don't have to go to geopolitics and explain to your audience about how water is becoming a significant factor in disrupting geopolitical stability in the world. And Africa is the first place you're going to see that with arable land. But also allow me to go back in politics because I care about this. Since I spoke about globalization undermining the world order the United States proudly led following World War II, there's clearly something going on with the rise of China and Russia, where they go head-to-head with us being the United States or the free world, if you're going to allow me to say that, promoting state capitalism as a prerequisite for economic growth. In this environment, when we have, 85% of the world's population lives in emerging economies, and these guys have to start facing a dilemma that we put to them. You have to have democracy as a prerequisite for economic growth. Well, these guys have an urgency, and the urgency is nutrition, put food on the table for their families first and then for themselves. State capitalism comes here in China's growth to undermine, to question what we work hard to support for years, that liberalism is a prerequisite for economic growth. Right? So for this, it's not that the citizens of the developing countries don't understand the value of democracy and liberalism, human rights and civil rights. They have to deal with them later. They're going to focus in the very beginning of feeding the families. And I think the penetration of China in Africa is a demonstration of that. So you allow me to go a few minutes on a stratosphere and just raise it up a little bit, because the connotations of what we're talking about can have profound strategic implications of the way of the world that we live in. At the same time, I know you and I are not easily being swayed by press pieces, but at the same time, climate change is an issue. Mm-hmm. The last logistics report from the largest and the most authoritative association that we have, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, it was just for 2018, it was just issued a few weeks back, and it just makes the case that climate change is something that affects profoundly all the assets of the supply chain businesses across the world. Supply chain leading companies are making provisions how to deal with it. Ports of entry are threatened by it. What we used to call corporate social responsibility, and that's what I've done in Europe for years. Most of the multinationals, Rick, for years now, they issue CSR reports that you read them through. You read Walmart's or Toyota's and you think Walmart is a United Nations organization. Why is it? Why is it that these companies do that? Being the elite, I have no doubt, I will not question anybody's good intent. I have no doubt that great men and women all over across the board that have philanthropic passions and aspirations. But at the same time, these companies have identified sustainability and CSR as a profit center. Mm-hmm. Consumers demand, among other things, traceability in the food case. They want to know where these things are coming from. But consumers reward, Rick, companies that care about sustainable production, understand the impact of the global footprint of what they're producing and how they transport them. And as such, food is affecting key strategic factors of companies moving forward and political systems being stable.
But in all of that, it sounds as though industry basically undertakes a large portion of the research dealing with food safety and security.
Yes.
Where do universities fit in? Texas A&M obviously has made a major investment in the whole question of food safety and security, but are there other Texas A&Ms that we just don't hear about, universities that are taking a leadership role in research?
Most of the research, Rick, is going to be on food safety, not on food security. Yeah. Food security, I would say again, go back. Mm-hmm. The byproduct is going to be a byproduct of that. Mm-hmm. Food security is more a political decision. You're going to see that at World Economic Forum's meetings, at Davos. So prime ministers and presidents get together. So food safety-wise, I'm going to bless A&M simply because A&M is one of the 5 large land-grant universities, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a huge agri-life component. And guess what? About 2 years ago, I was invited to lead the contribution of the College of Engineering on a DHS RFP, request for proposals for a DHS Center of Excellence of Biothreats for the supply chain, that we brought together Texas A&M Engineering, including the College of Engineering and the Texas Transportation Institute that we have, along with AgriLife, to come up with a proposal for a center that will look into the effects of pathogens transported, among other things, from food supply chains as they enter the United States in disrupting supply chains. And this is the last affiliation that you're kind enough to narrate in my bio. It has to do with CBTS, the Cross-Border Threat Screening and Supply Chain Defense, DHS. DHS comes back and says, look, I realize that is a critical component. What happens when a port shuts down because I have pathogens coming in through a simple container, right? Devastating effects in orders of billions for thousands of other supply chains that are using this critical supply chain not to come in. So that's a success that Texas A&M has taken into that. And of course, DHS having a mandate of what I call late technology readiness levels. So they're looking for much more late TRLs, Rick, right? So they're for much more applied work, and deservedly so. They want to look for solutions, mobile sets that they can do by operators, so they can really have a tangible effect on improving their performance for securing the nation, but at the same time, the safety of supply chains that enter the US. And the classical paradigm there is between I can struggle trade and I can struggle everything by improving security, but at the same time, I have to, or I can lack security, and then suddenly I have what, thousands of containers that enter the U.S. through the 300 major ports that we have, undermining the security of the nation. It takes one container.
One container. And so, in effect, what I hear you saying is that when it comes to food security, that's still not an area in which universities have placed a great deal of emphasis yet. Food safety is by far the greater topic, and there are universities doing that. But I also hear you saying that the chance of industry and the universities coming together for research purposes, is that in any way enhanced either by the nature of food safety and security now, or by the fact that food, which we take for granted in the United States as being safe and so forth, we're having to entertain the possibility that's not quite as safe as it once was. So what's going to drive the next evolution of the research?
Coming up on the higher level again, the Office of Science, Technology and Policy of the White House issues every year the R&D priorities for every fiscal year, right? So fiscal 2020s, among my disruptions, resilience, supply chains, and all the stuff, has one of the 5 or 6 areas as American agriculture. Yes, it's the most productive in the world, largely due to the long history of R&D investments in crop efficiency, nutrition, resilience. But I will come back to this word. That's why I stopped there for a sec. Agencies should prioritize R&D that enables advanced and precision agriculture. The Europeans are doing great in precision agriculture, including the use of embedded sensors, data analytics, and machine learning techniques to minimize agricultural inputs and maximize quantity and quality of agri products. So we're talking about here, Rick, the implementation of fourth revolution tools in digitizing the agricultural world as we know it. So that's the first, right? So the federal government clearly sees that. The federal government years back saw the huge gap that we have in advanced manufacturing. We're very good in basic research in manufacturing, very good in commercialization, but we lack the value of death. The value of death is this middle technology readiness levels that can translate basic research at the university level in commercialization. To that effect, the federal government developed the perennial National Network of Manufacturing Institutes, NNMIs. I think under the President Obama's presidency that continues on, and then the network was renamed a couple of years back as Manufacturing USA Institutes, public-private institutes emulating the famous Fraunhofer system of Germany of trying to bridge, and I know you're passionate about this, you allude to that, what universities do with the late technology readiness levels that are necessary for commercialization. Something like this is clearly needed for agriculture and agricultural engineering. I give you, Rick, I'll give you just the data that I looked for in healthcare. Since 2010, we have had 18,000 startups, 140 something like billion investment. In agri, the numbers are 1/10 of that. So we only had 1,000 startups, and the investment is about 14 billion. So there's a huge discrepancy, right? So despite all the new fancy stuff, in many ways, agriculture still acts as a legacy business.
But it also strikes me that it suggests that is a vulnerability that we can't really ignore for a long time, can we?
Absolutely. We live in an era that technology tools are disrupting everything, disrupting business models, and great capitalists are ready to walk in and disrupt the legacy systems. And as such, there are tools already that demonstrate great promise. You've seen it posed so many times because the questions that we ask are so huge that I don't know where to start from. I go back to what companies do and what universities do. I was on a call with Walmart. Walmart is using blockchain as a pilot initiative to capture leafy lettuce traceability from the state of California. Okay? Because I'm doing some stuff with the blockchain for DHS. Blockchain, a lot of people say, a lot of hype. Guess what? The gentleman who runs the show tells us And and it's not just Walmart, it's under the IBM's Food Trust software package. They invited also competitors of Walmart together, Kroger, I think, Carrefour, they're on the same consortium. We all know what happens with the pathogens, right, that are responsible for about 48 million cases of foodborne illnesses annually in the US, affecting 1 out of every 6 individuals, leading to about 130,000 hospitalizations and 3,000 deaths. In terms of economic impact, foodborne illnesses cost the American economy a year $77 billion. 77 billion. So I go back to Walmart is doing, and what they reported to me on a call is they're able to trace contamination on green leaf lettuce in a few seconds using blockchain, while in the past it will take them weeks because key stakeholders of the farm to fork supply chain, Rick, still today utilize pen and paper.
Oh my goodness.
Right? So here you are, you're receiving pallets of fresh produce in an H-E-B supermarket. You see pen and paper. You have no clue where this lettuce comes from. So blockchain suddenly has the ability for us to trace contamination in seconds, as opposed to having to investigate for weeks and having to take massive steps such as withdrawal of leafy lettuce across all US supermarkets to protect the population.
And it strikes me, Eleftherios, that by the, as you put it, when globalization really took off, it means that the kinds of research and the kinds of trials and the kinds of experiments that we're going to be doing will transcend national boundaries for sure.
Absolutely.
And will increasingly entail researchers looking at multiple national sources for both research efforts as well as for the development of practical tools that could be used to deal with food safety and food security. Is it too much to say that this is one of those areas of real opportunity for some researchers and some universities?
The footprint, look at the wheat that we import from China, right?
Perfect.
So we have to talk about global supply chains. The same way we talk about global supply chains of the work in progress electronics that we bring from Asia, food supply chains in a glocalized food pattern are indeed global. And in order for us to be effective, we have to take a global perspective. But this is the conundrum now, isn't it? We live in an era in this globalization economy where there are tremendous political pressures coming back and isolate ourselves. So here we have global problems, and climate change is one of them, global food supply chains that mandate global collaboration, yet today, I'm not sure it's super sexy to talk about universities across, let's say, Asia or China collaborating with universities in the US.
Excellent point. We're going to run out of time, but I always want to leave our listeners with one or two takeaways that you, if you have your druthers, could say, if anyone remembers what said, what are the one or two that you would really like people to come away from this particular podcast knowing?
Collaboration in this business is needed not just between universities and industries, but also across industry. A good friend from a major food production company that is passionate about this mentioned to me an initiative of the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry has a consortium called RX 360, you can Google it. It's called the International Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Consortium, with the goal of complementing local measures impacting life sciences and medical device industries, but to bring together legislators, regulators, and other organizations with the goal of achieving consistent supply chain standards. Rick, we do not have that in the food business. I will welcome leaders across academia, across global institutions, United States institutions, industry, that will take the initiative and bring everybody together to develop standards like this. I tell you, in Europe, you mentioned the center that I ran for years for the European Union. green supply chains. I brought some of the largest German logistics companies, the Efficiency Logistics Cluster, the largest R&D cluster, logistics cluster in the world. And what they told me is they reached out to governments asking, mandating common standards for capturing CO2 footprint from end-to-end supply chains. Governments were sluggish. So I have a packet of grapes that I'm selling to a supermarket, and I'm claiming this kind of carbon CO2 footprint. You do the same, right? But both of us use dramatically different ways of capturing CO2 footprint. So the competition is not fair. That's what these guys were asking. When they saw a lack of political will, the Deutsche Post, for example, along with Maersk, with the large German and large European logistics carriers, they came together, grassroots, bottom up, develop a consortium to develop consistent standards for capturing that. I think we need, pressing need for grassroots bottom-up initiatives in the food safety world that can come together. At the same time, we need academics, and I'm not excluding myself out of this business. Humility is the first and foremost prerequisite for that. We need academics that are willing to transcend the classical silos and try to develop an end-to-end understanding of how we can add value. How can we add value in this pressing environment? I give an example, Rick. Along with some other universities, leading universities that I'm not going to name right now, we submitted a proposal to a federal institution that will bring together food safety technologies for resilient global supply chains. I promise to talk about resilience again, simply because supply chains are exposed to so many unpredictable disruptions today, much more than ever before. Supply chain risk management is at the very top of C-level executives' agenda. Food safety technologies for resilient chains in a world where all food producers, processors, distributors, and retailers will have affordable access to low-cost, high-tech engineered solutions, right, for effective pathogen prevention, real-time screening and detection, and food safety intelligence tools to save lives and at the same time promoting economic growth. Because in the food security that you feel so passionate about, the superset, yes, I do care about providing food to everybody across planet Earth, the 6 billion or 10 billion that we're going to go by 2050. But at the same time, I'm going to do it in a way that farmers, transporters make a living out of this, right? And especially small-scale farmers that contribute to what, 75 to 8% of global growth. And in that, we try to bring to, I've just mentioned this indicatively, right? We try to bring together technologies for preventing pathogens, for surviving within foods, and on surfaces used in food processing, transport, and handling. So mechanical engineering kind of disciplines, right? Technologies for screening and detecting pathogens in real time during growth, harvest, transportation, and processing within a global supply chain context. And then data analytics and blockchain technologies for prediction, fast alerting, something is wrong in your supply chain. So here you have the dashboard flag, something is going on there. Management to even extract Rick information from social media, and structure information from social media that something is wrong, and act accordingly very fast. And to do that, we brought together people from electrical, mechanical, engineering, supply chain, logistics, agriculture, absolutely, food science. And I tell you, this is a daunting task. Every time we need to bring people together, it takes a certain character, interest, men and women who have this passion to collaborate and work, keeping the bigger picture in front of them. Allow me to finally make a third point that I think is very critical. I mentioned the Walmart case, right? This Walmart is the eighth trading partner of China, right? So we're talking about the largest retailer in the world, right? The revenue-wise, I think is still number one. But Walmart is very smart, right? And they say, okay, what do we do about the small farmers? What do we do about the small producers? This is a key issue. We're ready to talk about implementation or adoption of fourth industrial revolution tools at what? At the expense of small to medium enterprises who can afford, they don't have the political bandwidth They don't have the money, they don't have the technology to be able to do that. So Walmart says, you small producers, don't be afraid, right? So I'm going to give you full access to my blockchain, the IBA Food Trust platform. You will have to pay only if you're interested in some advanced data analytics out of all this business. And I'm using this as a caution that we have to be very mindful while we have billions of dollars right now spent stratified per business, ocean transportation, ocean supply chains, last mile logistics supply chains on blockchain. We have to develop tools that allow small to medium food enterprises to become more technological savvy so that they're not excluded by the supply chains of the giants. So when a Walmart comes to me and you, Rick, in a small Maryland farm or in a small Texas farm and demands blockchain or traceability sophistication, these good guys have the tools to be able to say, yes, we can partner. Because we go in divergent paths.
Yes.
The elite is investing heavily, is becoming more tech savvy, and there's the lag from the laggards, even in the developed world. So in the little federal initiative that we submitted with these other three major universities, this is the path that we took. We wanted to focus on small to medium enterprises and give them tools that can allow traceability. Traceability is a key component of this food supply chain. It's not just one attribute, because it allows profitability, the safety, it enhances safety, it enhances sustainability. It does so many things. So we're trying to give tools to small to medium enterprises that can become more competitive, and they can have higher leverage when they negotiate with the largest giants, the Walmarts of the world, so they can be interwoven in the latter's global supply chains. And that's critical.
First of all, I want to thank you very much for your time. Do say that I just, for a personal note, I came away from your conversation today with 3 points that just struck me. The first is that it's remarkable that we've gotten this far, given the complexity of what we're trying to do. And secondly, the vulnerability is still there. And I don't mean just economic, I mean health and otherwise.
Yes.
We remain, especially because of globalization, we remain a very vulnerable, and we can be just human beings wherever we're going. And then finally, it's abundantly clear that the only way you're going to reduce that vulnerability and to continue to make progress in food safety and food security is by collaboration. You can't withdraw from this world. You need to be engaged. Dr. Iakovou, thank you very much for your time today. We wish you the very best, and we hope to have you back again sometime soon on Innovators.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being with you, and anytime you need me, I'm there. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Innovators, a production of Harris Search Associates. We'll have more insightful conversations with global thought leaders to follow.